Okay, we are back with another episode of Q&A with Dr. Janowski. And Dr. Janowski today is going to talk to us about why he uses different types of needles. You may have seen that in many of our YouTube videos. He's developed some of his own special techniques. And so we wanted to ask him, why do you use different needles?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. You know, the longer I'm in practice, the more different types of techniques and needles and tools that I've acquired, because they each have their own special qualities. And you know, the goal really is to get the product at the right depth, hurt the patient as little as possible, cause as little bruising and recovery as possible, right? So we're all about pain control, but also how do we, it's like, you know, what paintbrushes do we use, right? So one of the most common ones that I like to use is this combination of needle syringe here. You can see it's a very, very small needle. This is an insulin syringe. It's a 0.3 ml, so it's a small volume, small and short needles. Right? The length of the needle is important. So we use this for a lot of different things. The most common is for superficial lines. We also inject our Botox and Dysport with it, and we also use it for lips. And in particular, I like it for lips because it's a very short, very small size needle, and we do what's called a micro-injection technique. So we don't use a long needle to go on the lip. You're just likely to really bruise someone. I always see a lot of people using those. We use a very short needle, and we go perpendicular to the lip and not along the lip. If we're going to do something along the lip, we would use a cannula, but generally we don't need to do that because these are almost painless, and we, along with numbing cream, people do very well with that in the lip. And then for superficial lines, we can get very close to the skin surface. We want to really get into the line, not underneath it. So I really like that one a lot.
And isn't that the same needle you use for Dysport?
Same needle we use for Dysport. For the same reason, we don't need to go very deep to get Dysport to work. We want a very small needle, and we want to be very precise with it. So it's a nice needle for that. When I numb people up, I use an even smaller needle, even than that, and this is called a 32 gauge needle. It's almost the smallest needle you can get. It's probably the smallest commercial needle you can get right now. And so again, we want to use very, very fine needles if we're numbing someone up with numbing medicine, and we pop that onto the syringe, and people barely feel it. We use that in accordance with, in conjunction with a vibrating tool that we place on the skin, so the vibration really distracts the skin. And then a very, very common thing that we use, of course, is a micro-cannula, which is a really, really important one, because the micro-cannula is not blunt, right? It's not sharp enough to pierce the skin, and so it's got a blunt tip, and that has several, of course, very important qualities. One is that you're not likely to cut a vessel. It's not cutting underneath the skin. Number two, it's not likely to enter a vessel and inject product into a vessel, which we don't want to do. And it hurts a lot less than a needle, right? So it just kind of glides in and allows us to be very precise in our placement, and also use less poking points. So we can go through a common entry point to reach a number of different areas. So this 25 gauge cannula is very, very common. And then, you know, we have more, of course, our standard needles that come with our syringes, like the 29 gauge. It's still very small. I really hardly ever really have to go beyond a 29 gauge. So the higher the number, the smaller the gauge. So we talked about 32, and then now we're talking about a 29 gauge needle. So again, all these different tools are used in different ways depending on how deep I want to go, how thick the product is, and then we want to use the smallest gauges possible when we're talking about needles. So those are just some of the tools that I use to inject our filler and Dysport products.
Thank you.
Okay.